Hi, well, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me this afternoon, Maria. And thank you very much for contributing to the session at Courton House on the 30th of September. I thought it was a really good day. I think everybody really enjoyed it. And it'd be very interesting to get your perspectives on that. Could you first just introduce yourself and your role at Courton House? Would that be okay?
Yep, sure, Andrew. Nice to talk to you. So, my name's Maria Widdrington, and I'm the activities lead here at Courton House Care Home. We're just an independent, non-profit single care home, and I have a team of two others. So there's three of us in this activities team,
Good.
and the care home has 42 residents. So actually, three people working with that amount of residents is actually quite a good number.
It is. Yeah, no, it's very good. And certainly
Yeah,
if I think about the care homes I've worked in the past, they were lucky to have a single person doing it. And then that single
yeah,
person was often expected to step in if there was a shift missing, or so
yeah,
I'd turn up for a meeting with them and they'd be off having to deliver lunch
yeah,
or showing a family around or something like that. So, I
yeah.
mean, that's a really good provision. Could you speak a little bit about your experience of arts in your care home and how perhaps it helps people to connect in various ways?
Yeah, I've worked here now 15 years. And when I first came here, there was no designated activities person. So I started from scratch. My background isn't in care, which I think made me a bit fearless and to think outside the box. So I quickly picked up that anything creative um, kind of was a bit different to bingo. And, there's a kind of samey sort of stuff that people assume old people want to do.
Yeah, sure.
So over the years, I've done quite a few projects. And I started, once I'd been here about a year or two, I really said yes to a lot of creative people who usually had funding. So it wasn't going to cost the care home anything. And that's why my manager at the time was in agreement. If I wanted money, it was probably going to be different. So over the years, I've done quite a few projects. And I think now my care home certainly realizes that activities plays a huge role in any care home. And the benefits of that is huge.
So
So
do you so
so
do you
we pay
still
for stuff. We will pay
you
for,
do pay for it now?
yeah,
Okay.
we will. But I
Yeah.
mean, we still are always happy, if it's funded, it's always great. But yeah, we will pay for stuff now. There's usually quite a bit of funding around still, but it's knowing the right people. So I'm not very good at applying for funding. I think that's a skill set all on its own. But because I've always said yes to a lot of these sort of creative people in Norwich and Norfolk, they they tend to get the funding and then they'll come to me. We might be part funded. So I think for an activities person to try and get the funding is really difficult. We now at Courton House actually have a designated person who works about 30 hours a week who will help to get funding for various things. So
Oh,
we've actually
interesting.
employed somebody
Yeah.
um, to raise money for Courton House because, as I say, we're non-profit, we're charity organisation, and so they've actually employed somebody, which I think is really, you know, creative in itself. And
Yeah,
the importance,
it's quite far-sighted, I think, to do that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't come
yeah,
across many in care homes
yeah.
who
So
actually have a person with those sort of skill
yeah,
set.
she'll go out in the community and she'll find things and then try and talk about funding or can this organization help us? And because she's got that skill set, you'd be amazed at the help you can get
Mm.
if you
That's
know the
interesting.
right, if you know the right procedures, really.
Of course, certainly when we had the workshop here in Newcastle, I spoke to one of the care home leads, in fact, the owner, and she was saying how hard it was to get funding. So it's interesting that seem to have
I
tracked.
think it is. There's lots of hoops to go through, but I think if you do that regularly, as a lot of like eyebrow arts that we were working with on this project, they are so used to it now. They know the things to say, the people, they know how to apply. It's a
Fantastic.
skill. It's a
It
skill.
is, and not an easy one. That's
And not an
interesting.
easy one, but I do think whether it's different in the north to the south, but there's definitely still quite a bit of funding around.
That's impressive. That's impressive.
Mm.
One of the things that we got the funding for the workshops was to try to explore relationships and connections between people. And what was very evident that when I observed the activity from Dr. Sorrell, that we were essentially slotting into a series of pre-existing relationships that
Mhm.
were already quite strong. Could you say a little bit about how those relationships are fostered and how maybe the activity might contribute to that?
Um, do you mean the staff?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the care staff usually are just doing care. Of course, they've got interactions, they know the people well, and activities tends to be us three who were there, and our role is very different, and we're forming different, we're finding out different things about them, and so we're seen very different, I think, by the residents.
Is that
Um,
easy? Is that process easy to
uh,
find out about people's backstories,
it's
or is it
very,
a challenge?
we do life when somebody comes in here. One of my team will do a life history.
Right. Okay.
So we actually probably find out about people a bit quicker than even, or depending on the care needs of that resident. If
Mm.
that resident doesn't need much care in terms of a carer going in for personal care or whatever, then I think it would take carers longer to really get to know the person. Where as soon as that person moves in here, we are involved. And we're trying to communicate with the families, with friends, and with the person to find out as much information as we can to then figure out, what we can try and encourage them to be involved with. So usually it's very separate. Those three members of care staff who were involved are dementia champions. So they have a definite interest. So they would have probably been a bit more involved than the average carer. But if we're all doing our job properly, all carers should know all residents
Yeah.
eventually.
In
But it
time.
takes a bit of time. And it
Sure.
depends, on the capability of the resident, on how they can express and pass that information on. So you're reliant a lot on friends and family
Mm.
as well. Don't forget they come in here, big life change,
Oh Lord.
hugely distressing.
Yeah.
Often they're coming from their home into an institution, really.
Mm.
And so, it's a fine line. You don't want to jump on them too quickly, but the quicker they can make friends and get involved, the better it is, really.
Sounds really good. Do you find there needs to be some sort of cultural understanding between the carers and the residents? My mind goes to Bristol, where we had the Chinese and South Asian communities talking to us, and one of the challenges that they felt there was those communities hoping that the care home would be able to respond culturally to what their needs were, either in terms of food or festivals. And there was a certain
Yeah.
anxiety among those communities as to whether the care homes would be able to provide that or not. So
So you mean there was a resident who was Chinese? Yeah.
there was a care home that they had worked with for a while, but then felt that the community groups had worked with them.
Mm,
But after a while, there were a couple of instances when it hadn't quite worked out in the way they had expected it to. And I
yeah.
think it just underpins, if you like, the cultural needs. If the people you're looking after are culturally very similar to you, then I guess it's easier in some ways than if they're not.
Yeah. I
More
mean,
challenging.
uh, in our care home, we predominantly have white and even in most cases, Norfolk people.
Right. Yeah.
We don't have anyone from culturally, particularly a different background or even religion.
Right. Yeah.
That's going to come in a few years down the track. What we have had, though, is a huge shift in staff. We now have a huge cultural shift in our staff. I would say 5 years ago, not because we were not employing people from different backgrounds, they weren't the people to employ. But our care home in the last 2 years, suddenly we have quite a large Caribbean and Asian community of staff, which can have its challenges with the residents in understanding. You know, they have accents that maybe somebody doesn't understand. So it's not so much the residents, it's staff where we've had the shift.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that can, we have had some situations where some residents will not be comfortable having the certain cultures or of a certain colour helping with personal care.
So have you found a way of overcoming that, or?
Yep.
You
So,
have?
well, what we've done, I mean, there'll be some residents who do not want a male carer, regardless of where they've, you know, where they're from originally. And then there'll be some, not only do they not want a male carer, but they also do not want anyone who's black.
Somebody who's different to them. Yeah.
Who's different to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how we have to respect people's wishes, but one of the things I did was we have 4 carers who come from the same area in India. And I got them to come in and talk about their culture, talk about their religion, talk about the food they eat, what their families do. And the residents absolutely loved that. And it changed the way some residents, not all at all, because in Norfolk, probably 20 years ago, we really didn't have a vast group of different people. You know, I know the UEA has, but we were not experiencing that in the care home, or these people have not experienced. So I think one of the ways is to break it down to a personal level so that they could find out a bit more about each person and their family, their beliefs, and it really changed the way some people were reacting.
That's interesting. It's interesting. Interesting.
And I would say that would be the other way on as well. That, you know, if so, we are a Christian home. Any religion, any person of any religion can move in here, and there were some differences. You know, Catholic. We had somebody who was a Quaker,
right,
and that could pose some problems. So what we did was we had talks on each religion.
Okay.
And that person would talk to the group and they could ask any questions. They might still differ their opinions, but it's about education, isn't it, really?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah.
So we have had some experiences of different religions as such, but not anything big culturally, as I say, apart from the staff. And we're going to do other talks with other staff members, because it did change the way some residents were reacting.
And that must affect relationships. And I guess, you know, you've recognized there was an issue and you've overcome it.
Yeah, I mean, it could have, I mean, we of course have sixth form volunteers from various schools. So we would get youngsters coming in, 16, 17-year-olds who's, you know, their families may have been born in a different country. That's because it wasn't personal care, or they didn't work here, they were just volunteers. That didn't pose a problem.
Okay, but it's more about personal care. I guess you can
More
understand.
about staff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't sort
Mm.
of come across it from that perspective before, but it's going to be the same, isn't it? I can
Well,
really.
I think now you'll find that certainly most care homes now, a lot of them sponsor
Mm,
people from India and various other countries because there's a problem with recruitment in this
mm,
country for social
mm.
care.
Yeah, no, absolutely,
So
absolutely.
it's going to change a lot of care homes. Some were already, like some care homes, you'd have a large Polish community, or they would work with each other because they spoke the same language or something. But I think now all care homes are going to have to consider this.
I think they are, absolutely they are. And to be honest, you're the first care home I've come across that has considered it, but it must be there in the other care homes as
Yeah, and
well.
I think you do have to because you can't. I mean, the residents, I don't believe are racist, but some of their comments are.
Yes, yeah. It's just lack of exposure to different cultures and
Lack of
different ways of
exposure.
seeing the
It's about
world.
education
Yeah.
and seeing the people on a personal level,
Mm.
breaking down those barriers. It on 9 times out of 10 has worked.
Thank you. That's a really interesting comment.
Mm.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you a little bit more about the activities that you've observed? Given people's, what struck me a little bit about the, observing the activity was the
Mm.
differences between people. Now, this has always been an issue, I think, that some people may
Yeah,
have more advanced dementia than others. Some people
yeah,
may, there was a chap I think who had Parkinson's there
yeah,
who had to be treated slightly differently to everybody else.
yeah.
Because of those differences, does does the arts practitioner always get it right, or is it impossible to really please everybody? You just have to, I guess they have to do their best, don't they, to try and engage
Yeah.
everybody?
I mean, normally, I mean, we're not a dementia home. So
No.
we also have people who are totally compos mentis, have no dementia whatsoever, but physically they might be frail. And so sometimes I have had art projects where I've had somebody who is totally fully engaged mentally, and at the other end, quite an advanced dementia person. And what's interesting with creative, it can be very inclusive. Um, but you have to gear it up that way, which eyebrow arts are really good at. That session we did here, where you were present, we only had people with dementia, but within that there are huge differences, as you saw.
Yeah.
So it is. I think creative stuff can be extremely inclusive, but it is really, really hard if you have all those different dimensions and you haven't got enough staff supporting. That worked because we were literally one to one.
Mm. It would have
That
been more
wouldn't have
difficult if it
worked
hadn't
quite
been one
so
to one.
smoothly if we had had, as we would normally have, probably myself and one other activity person, and then Dot and Sorrel. So there would have been four, as opposed to there was eight, I think, double. So they would have had to have worked harder. They probably wouldn't have got through so much. So it would have been a very different situation.
Yeah, certainly in another activity I've observed in a care home, the artist ended up splitting the group into two, doing it
Yeah,
twice, one for those with more advanced dementia and
yeah.
one session for those who are more moderate.
I'm
Uh,
not sure the best way to do any of this because the trouble is each art project is quite unique.
mm,
So when you have any art project, I mean, we've done all sorts of things. We've just started one this morning, which is dance based, seated dance. So we've got this two new people come in. I've never worked with them before, and they were doing a lot of sensory stuff. And we had a mixed bag of people there, some with dementia, but not advanced dementia, and some people who had no dementia. I think there were about seven, and the two girls worked together. Mel, my colleague, was in there, but she pretty much let them get on with it. And you really don't know how it's going to go
Yeah.
because they're all unique. So there's not like a template you can work from
No, I know. I
because
was
it's
sort of,
creative.
yeah, it
And
is,
because
of
it's
course.
creative, it's unique.
Yeah, it is. And when I've observed this sort of thing, I always think the art, you watch the artists read the room and read the emotions of the room,
Yeah.
and then they decide on what to do. But it almost feels like magic. And I'm sure it's not really, it's not really magic, but it
But
just,
there
for
does
the
have to be,
observer, it
yeah.
feels like it,
In a way, though, you do have to, I think they're fearless because you've kind of got a plan, but you can't be controlled by that plan. And you know yourself, if you teach or whatever, if you need a lesson plan, but if you're going to stick so rigidly to that and you're not looking at what's in front of you and what the response is, you're not going to, it's not going to go as well.
No, you're
As,
absolutely right.
I'm a yoga teacher as
Oh,
well. So
okay.
I'll stand in front of a load of people who I know very well, and I have in my mind what I'm going to do, what I want to achieve. But I can tell you sometimes 5 minutes in,
Mm.
I've gone completely off piste and I'm doing something completely different. And you can do that if you've got the experience, as you probably know.
Absolutely. And that was one of the problems with teaching during COVID when we were reliant on making films, that you never
Yeah.
had the students in front of you. Therefore,
So
you
you
just
couldn't
had to give a
see or
presentation.
feel. It's almost your feeling,
Yeah,
aren't
it
you?
is.
You
It is.
can't explain it. It's a very difficult thing to
Mm.
explain to people who are not in that position. Like, what do you mean you haven't got a plan?
Yeah.
But what I quickly learned with all the first couple of creative things I did, arty things, I wanted a result and I pushed for that result. And it was frustrating. It didn't work. I think it just wasn't an enjoyable experience. And now I let it be an organic experience
I think you learn, don't you,
because
that
you're
it's,
dealing with
yeah,
humans.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but you have to have the people who are delivering it have to understand and have enough confidence themselves. And someone like Dot and Sorrel, very experienced,
They're good. Yeah, they're
they're
good.
good. They know. So I
Mm.
could, I was just floating around making sure everybody was where they should be and
Yeah.
just I didn't know what was going to happen. So it's quite hard to know who to encourage into the room then, isn't it?
Of course it is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really hard.
But with
Really.
if we're just talking about people with dementia as well, what you've got to add to that equation is one day they could be pretty switched on and responsive, and another day they could be quite aggressive, but they can't all upset, but they can't express themselves. And so you might think we usually have a little list of who we think might like it. And 9 times out of 10, that's not who ends up in there or who stays in there
Yeah.
at all. So it's all a bit it's not how we all operate in life, is it, really?
No, it's very different. It is a very
And
different.
you have to have the experience really to know who to encourage on that day. The carers do as well.
Mm.
To sometimes, if you just sit with somebody for a bit, they won't want to leave the room, but sometimes let that person go because they're not going to respond today. So
Absolutely.
there's all
And
these
not to
little
be,
nuances going on, which is,
and also not to be offended by that, because I think
and not to take it personally.
not taking offense by that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And for the people who are delivering, for them not to take it personally because you want it to go well. So there's a lot of pressure, and I'm not sure all care homes and their staff, and I've just the feedback I've had from all the creative people I work with, I don't feel they get the same experience and the sensitivities that should be involved with this everywhere they go.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Yeah. So difficult.
Um, and then, of course, I know there was some talk when we did the sort of feedback about should we have had tables? Are they a barrier? And somebody has to decide some of those things, because, but also you've got to realize that somebody will want a cup of tea. Could they hold a ball? So you're trying to be practical, you're trying to be sensitive. There's so many issues. And I guess because I've done this for 15 years, I've got enough experience, and my team have been with me 2 years and 5 years. We now you can always be surprised, but you kind of have that experience. And I think a lot of care homes have a high turnover of staff, and a lot of activities people don't, they seem to, I'm on various forums, and they seem to leave jobs or start jobs, and there's a lot of moving around.
There is, and you really need time, I think, within a
need
context,
time.
don't you?
Yeah, you need time.
Yeah.
So it's it's only really when I'm talking about it you realise just how much you have to consider.
Absolutely, there are a lot of variables, aren't there? A lot of things to bring
loads, and I think you've got to be accepting of it being quite free.
Yeah, I think you do, and if you can't, it's not the job for you. I don't think it's.
Or you can't do those sort of activities. I mean, if you're going to do bingo, if you're going to do a knitting group, then you can control those. But if you're going to do creative stuff, I mean, really good quality creative stuff, you cannot work in the same way.
No, I agree completely. How would you characterize the benefits, perhaps, to a resident and to staff as well of these sorts of activities?
Again, it's quite hard to with people with dementia. It's quite hard to measure. With people who haven't got dementia or have early onset dementia, who can answer, give you an answer, we often will, talk to them later, get feedback. And for me, the biggest thing is working together. So it can really help people's self-esteem. So I think of one particular resident in the thing we did with you guys, and Angela, I'll just say her first name. Angela has early onset dementia, but will often come into a quiz or with people who have no dementia. And a lot of the time, she's not really joining in fully, but wants to be part of that. She really shone that day because she was kind of, top of the class, if you like. So nice. She really came out of a shell, and she was the one who said, let's all hold hands. And she really blossomed and flourished, and we could definitely measure that. And I think it was a real validation for her.
That's really encouraging. It's nice.
Yeah. So I think it can have many benefits, but again, it's really hard to measure. We actually ran this thing called Forget-Me-Nots. I don't know whether that was sort of countrywide, but it was. You have?
Haven't, no.
Right. So I think it was church-based. Volunteers would come in, and it was cognitive. It was working on sort of stimulating cognitively people who had dementia. And so we'd have the same people in every week for 6 weeks. And we pretty much worked one-to-one. So there were loads of volunteers. There'd be me and maybe one other, my staff. And every week we would sing the same song as a welcome song to include the group. We'd have flowers on the table. We'd have objects, random objects that people could just fiddle with, because people with dementia tend to fiddle. And we would have a topic. So it could be the garden. We'd have lots of visuals. But at the end of each hour-long group, the residents would leave, And then the volunteers who'd all been trained in this particular way of working, including myself, we would then give a number. So 5 was that person was really engaged, or 1, they really were not. And so we actually over 6 weeks could measure and see that there were some people who definitely, would remember the song, or it helped them cognitively.
Oh,
And this
yeah.
is people with early, maybe mid dementia. So we did actually measure it. But again, do you normally have time to do those things? Do you normally have the amount of people who can, discuss those things? No. And we did have a plan. So even though the subject was different, there was a definite beginning, middle, and end.
I think it's really difficult to measure.
I think it's hugely difficult.
Extremely. Maybe it's not even possible.
Yeah, I mean, the other person who was in that room was Martin, who was making a noise, stress related. He came in towards the end. You probably remember he was at the end of the table and really was not engaged. But by the end, the noise he was making subsided somewhat, not completely, as he just needed a lot more time to be response. And another time he could have been in there and responded immediately. About a week ago, we had some young babies in, and he was very distressed, but we managed to get him into the room where we were holding these movement groups with young children and babies.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And the parents were really open, and so this baby was sat on Martin's lap.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
And he completely stopped the noise, was fully engaged, and was asking questions to the mother.
That is nice, isn't it? That's nice.
So you could instantly see that was very measurable and moving, actually.
Absolutely.
And he could have, that might have happened in that session. And that's why you just don't, we had no idea that was going to happen. It just happened that a baby was nearby. He reached his arm out. The mother was receptive. The baby went on his lap. And so obviously we record that. We think, okay, could that work again for Martin?
Of course you do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I thought he'd be responsive to what we were doing in that workshop. Didn't work quite as well. So you never,
never really be absolutely sure.
And I don't know, he could have had some benefits to that workshop because he was part of the group. But again, there's no way you can ask him.
No, I think it's quite often with people living with dementia, it's the impact in that moment.
Yes, they're living in the moment, aren't they?
They are. So any change in that moment is really what it's about.
Yes,
trying to look beyond it is more challenging.
I mean, we've had people who've walked out of a really fantastic session of something, and they've literally walked down the corridor, and I've said, "Oh, did you enjoy that? Why? What was I doing?" And you think, crikey, you are literally living in the moment, which is what we should all be doing, actually, Andrew.
Sure, no, I agree. It's quite challenging, though, isn't it?
Quite challenging. Yeah,
absolutely it is.
But you're right. You've got to be, and that brings me back to staff have to be very observant in the moments, because that's your only cue, really.
Sure, it is. So these relationships are very complex.
Yeah.
They may change really over quite short periods.
Fluctuating all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody could come in distressed, go out quite happy.
Yeah.
The opposite could happen. Somebody comes in quite relaxed, then they get tired, become distressed.
Yeah.
So you've got that going on as well.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, the way the relationships change.
Yeah.
Over quite short periods of time within the session, before and afterwards. And the
Also,
success is really dependent on that, and that's
yeah,
really
and
difficult to
also
do.
it depends on sometimes who they're sitting next to. For
Yeah.
some reason, somebody could take a dislike to somebody opposite for no apparent reason.
Excuse me a
So,
minute. Sorry.
yeah,
Back in again
so
now.
so suddenly you have to. So the dynamics of people,
Mm, of course.
personalities.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Mm,
there's so much going on
mm,
that no,
yeah,
you absolutely do need to be doing one-to-ones, really. But
yeah,
that isn't the real. We discussed a lot of things that day afterwards, and I just felt that even though I think we have quite a good care home and we do some great stuff here, the reality is you haven't got enough staff or money to have an ideal situation.
no, it's just not possible, is it?
It's just not going to be possible.
No,
And probably you could talk about schools in the same way, universities in the same way. You have to be realistic too.
you do. Absolutely. Yeah, you've got to be practical, do the best ones can
Yeah,
within the resources you have
yeah.
available at that moment. Yeah, I can fully understand that. Fully understand that. Do you feel that these relationships benefit staff as well as the
Um,
is it a sort of like a two-way thing or?
I think the girls who came in, the dementia champions, and they were given some time to sit with residents. They don't normally have that time. They're under a lot of pressure to answer
Mm,
bells. They certainly felt validated and um, were pleased that they could be part of that.
mm,
Um, I think when they know residents have come out of a session of anything and they're happy, then that affects staff because if you've got happy residents, they're not ringing the
mm,
bells so much, or they're not
mm,
crying, or
mm,
whatever else they're doing.
mm.
So, but I think ideally, I would like to do more of that sort of thing where we're including staff on a more deeper level.
Okay.
I definitely think,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And those three members of staff, they don't particularly work with each other. They're on different shift patterns.
yeah. Mm,
So I think that would have gelled them as
mm.
they're not only dementia champions, but they did something together.
Of course, and it must be satisfying. You're there as a
Satisfying,
carer.
yeah,
The more you know about the person, the more you're
yeah.
actually able to play that role.
And they felt they made a difference because they
Yeah, they do.
knew the resident, they were working with them one-to-one.
Yeah, yeah.
Care work is soul destroying,
Oh,
really.
potentially, yes, absolutely.
Potentially, you're
Yeah.
not well paid.
No.
You're doing the worst part of the job, really. I'm at the other end doing the best part of the job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to
So
think about
for
both.
a lot of them, it's a thankless task. Residents get really frustrated. They take it out on the carers. They've never got enough time, really. And as I say, we're a well-staffed care home.
Mm,
Um, I think it's very different for a lot of these big, the ones where they've got lots of care homes.
mm.
They're worked very much on a profit basis.
Yes, they are. Inevitably, they
They're
are.
run as a business.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've been into a couple of the big ones recently and amazed at the lack of staff
Mm,
and the lack of a lot of things going on,
mm.
really. So even our girls feel under pressure, and you go through waves. So you might have a group of residents, and they don't have too much. They don't need a lot of care, and then all of a sudden those people get frail. So
Mm,
you kind of go through these patterns where then you might have quite a few people with high needs, then
mm.
they die, and then some new people come in and they don't, so it's
So
constantly
it goes up
fluctuating.
over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, tends to be more over.
And so sometimes they're under a lot of pressure, and
Mm.
they and a lot of the residents, so I hold residents forums, will say, I wish the staff had more time to just sit on my bed and talk to me.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And you
So
can you can understand.
that's where we come in.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
that's our main job. We go into rooms, we sit with people on a one-to-one basis.
Mm.
We're trying to meet those needs. But I do feel sorry for the carers because they don't get that opportunity.
No. And I mean, I know I've worked in a care home when the staff were being moved around quite a lot. I think it was a 3 or 4 care home group. So they would do different shifts across the different care homes.
Yeah, see, we don't, we're one care home.
Yeah,
So we
so
have
it's
a
easier.
consistent group of people.
Yeah, so it's
Um,
easier to build those relationships, I guess. And if you're being moved around all
I
over.
don't know. Yeah, because we did go through a phase where we had lots of agency,
Hmm.
and we don't have any agency now. That really doesn't work.
Yes, I'm sure it doesn't.
It's a bit like agency for nurses, or they have no they haven't invested in these people, have they? They've come in,
Yeah.
they get paid, they do a shift. It could be anywhere they go.
And they go over again and maybe go
Yeah.
to another different care home somewhere
I
else.
mean, the carers definitely build up relationships. And of course, every carer will have some residents they get on better with others. I mean, that's
Hmm.
human nature as well.
Of course, of course.
But we have the same staff. We don't have agency anymore, because we found that was quite distressing for the residents.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm sure it was. I mean, if you put yourself in
Yeah.
the shoes of the residents as somebody coming on, looking after you, and they're
And
not
every
somebody you
week it's someone
recognize
different, or every
every week,
day
someone
even.
different. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you'd want to, as a resident, you'd want to build those relationships,
Yeah.
just normal, everyday social interaction,
Yeah.
asking
Exactly.
someone how they've been for the weekend or how their partner
Yeah.
is or how their kids are getting on.
And yeah, and because you know a little bit, I mean, if you work in a care home, you should know at least a few bits of information on every resident you have. And obviously, if they're here for a period of time, you'll know a lot.
Hmm.
And those snippets of information is your gateway into communication
Absolutely. Yeah,
at the
absolutely.
bare bones of it, really.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's fascinating. I think I've worked through really all the questions
Right?
I've got here. Is there anything that I should have asked you and I haven't? It's a classic end of interview question.
Um, I did think, and I want to say this when we were all talking about, maybe business plans ought to have, this, that, and the other in. And I just thought, in the ideal world, yeah, but we've got to be realistic. And, but I do believe that meaningful activities, not just activities for the sake of activities. So it doesn't always have to cost you money. It doesn't always, there's a lot of care homes and they have a Facebook page and there's these very sort of token photos and it looks like a lot is going on. But when you really get to it, and you've probably been in some of these care homes and you really get down to the nuts and bolts, there's not really a lot of engagement going on,
No,
but
no.
it looks pretty good on a website or, well, it's a bit like people's lives on Facebook. People go on there and you think, oh, they've got a fantastic life. And it's not like that at all.
No, that's
And
presenting a particular image to the world.
yeah, and I just think um, if if people were just a bit more sensitive and really just thought a bit more and went and thought outside the box, and creativity is the way in to really get good connections with people. Singing, dancing, drawing, painting, whatever it is it breaks down so many barriers
It does, and it makes that connection
and it
that
makes it
otherwise
deeper.
might not be there, or
Yeah,
may
it
take longer.
makes it
Yeah,
deeper,
it does.
and
Yeah.
there's loads of information out there about how music can, how
Mm.
that can make your body feel, how you release endorphins when you move your body, all of that stuff I think is really true. So you don't have to do too much, but you do have to maybe think outside the box and just be a bit sensitive to the people who are in front of you. rather than be more interested in the photograph and what it looks like. You
Sure.
need to know how it feels.
Yeah, feeling is what it's about. It's about emotion.
Feelings, yeah. And I think creativity gets you to that place
Yeah.
more than any other activities we do.
And it appears to stay even with other losses. So people with fairly advanced dementia are still capable of quite a lot of creativity. It doesn't seem to go like other.
Absolutely. I mean, we could have somebody who's quite mute, non-verbal. A song comes on or a piece of poetry. So we run a poetry group, and suddenly that person is singing the right words or reciting poetry. Because it's because feelings are embedded more. We all know that with dementia. Your feelings are, in there still, much more than facts or whatever else.
Absolutely.
So if you can connect with the feelings through, and it usually is through music, art, whatever, then you get in there a bit deeper, and that's where you'll get some engagement or response.
Fundamental emotional engagement with other.
Yeah, it's really quite simple, but I don't know as a lot of care homes are really thinking about those things, because they're just trying to get through the day, and the physical needs become almost more important, because we've got all this sort of CQC stuff, all this stuff we have tick boxes.
I mean,
we're going to tick so many boxes, but we're not going to feel.
I mean, I did try to get a Care Quality Commission person along to the Newcastle workshop to try and explain this sort of stuff, because the sense is that care has become very practical.
Yeah.
And the person-centered care, which came on in the 1990s, that the CQC tends to adhere to, has become very practical. I don't think it was originally envisaged in that way, but it's become like that. So the focus is on the basic medical care, and of course that's important, giving people the right medication.
Of course, it's important. It is. Yeah, you can't have somebody
more than that.
you can't have somebody who's not being washed or fed. Or those are things. But sometimes there's so much tick boxing and hydration and this, that, and the other we have to fill in. We're forgetting the other stuff. And you're right, everybody's on about person-centered care, but that, for me, person-centered care is about the feeling of that person, not just whether they've had a litre of water.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And the trouble is that I think now even the person-centered care has become a bit of a tick box scenario, and we all have these devices now, and you put down how much somebody drank and what they had to eat and all of this stuff. And a lot of it is important.
Yeah, of course.
But then while you're doing all that paperwork or all those ticking of boxes, have you missed holding somebody's hand and listening to some music together?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the danger, that you do miss it and it just becomes the practical stuff, and the quality of life stuff is just lost.
Can be lost. You are keeping these people well physically,
but not psychologically necessarily.
No.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, I hope it helps.
It really does. I'll just stop the recording there.
Yeah.
Just